Today, to continue our study in solving equations, we're going to be talking about how to solve absolute value equations. Now, just as a reminder, absolute value is the distance from 0 on a number line. So the absolute value of a certain number, the absolute value of 10, is the distance that 10 is from 0 on the number line. So because it is a distance, it's never going to be negative. And when you're solving an absolute value equation, you may get two answers. Now the reason that is if you think about it, how far is a certain number from 0 on a number line? Well, there are two different directions in which you can go and get the same distance. So when you're solving an absolute value equation, same thing happens. There are two possible answers that will get you the same thing. Now, how do you go about solving it? So if you are trying to solve an absolute value problem, you will write two equations. The first equation is going to be the original equation without the absolute value signs. The second equation, you're going to keep the original left-hand side without the absolute value signs, and then make the right-hand side negative, or the opposite. All right, so let's take a look at some examples. So in this first one, we have the absolute value of 2x equals 5. We have to write two equations to solve this. The first one, we simply take out the absolute value signs. So it would just be 2x equals 5. For the second equation, we're going to keep the left-hand side the same without the absolute value, so just 2x. And then on the right-hand side, we will make that the opposite, so that will be negative 5. So 2x equals negative 5. Now to solve this, I'm going to divide both sides by 2. So we have x is equal to 5 over 2, or 2.5. And then do the same thing with the second equation. Divide both sides by 2, we end up with x equals negative 2.5. All right, let's look at the next one. We have x over 3 inside the absolute value signs equals 4. And here we're going to write two equations. The first one is going to be x over 3 equals 4, and the second one, x over 3 equals negative 4. It's going to be the opposite on the right-hand side. Now we'll solve each equation by multiplying both sides by 3. So this ends up being x equals 12, and the second one will give us x equals negative 12. Now you might be looking at your answers and thinking, why do I have to write two equations? Won't the answers always be x equals the positive and the negative version of the same number? Well, not always. Let's see this in the next example. So we have x plus 1, the absolute value of that, equals 3. We'll write our two equations, so x plus 1 equals 3, and x plus 1 equals negative 3. Now to get x by itself, I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. That leaves me with x equals 2. Now when I do that for the second equation, I end up with x equals negative 4. So you notice here it's not that x equals 2 and negative 2. In fact, we have x equals 2 and x equals negative 4. All right, so the other thing to note as you are solving absolute value equations is that you must isolate the absolute value before splitting it into two equations. Now with the problems that we just did, the absolute values were already by themselves on one side, but that's not always going to be the case. So always make sure you get the absolute value by itself before you write your two equations. All right, let's look at example 2. 3 times absolute value of x plus 2 equals 9. So notice here that the absolute value is not by itself. There's a 3 in front of it. So I'm going to start by dividing both sides by 3. That leaves me with the absolute value of x plus 2 equals 3. All right, now we can write two equations. The first one will be x plus 2 equals 3. And the second equation will be x plus 2 equals negative 3. So now this part is the same as the last couple of problems we did. Now we go ahead and get x by itself, so subtract 2 from both sides. That gives us x equals 1. Do the same thing here, subtract 2 from both sides, and that leaves us with x equals negative 5. All right, in the next one, we have the absolute value of x over 9 equals 2. So again, we want to get that absolute value by itself. And since there's a 9 that we're dividing by here, I'm going to multiply both sides by 9 to get the absolute value by itself. So that leaves me with the absolute value of x equals 18. Write the two equations. We have x equals 18 and x equals negative 18. And actually, we don't need to simplify any further because x is already by itself in both cases. So x equals 18 and negative 18. All right, next we have the absolute value of n minus 1 equals 7. So we can start off by adding 1 to both sides to get the absolute value by itself. So we have the absolute value of n equals 8. And now we can write the two equations. So n equals 8 and n equals negative 8. And n is already by itself, so those are our answers to this problem. Okay, in the next one, we have the absolute value of p plus 2 all over 4 equals 3. Now, to get the absolute value by itself, we're going to go ahead and multiply both sides by 4. So that leaves me with the absolute value of p plus 2 equals 12. And now I can write my two equations. So the first equation will be p plus 2 equals 12, the same thing without the absolute value signs. And the second equation will be p plus 2 equals negative 12. So to make that right-hand side the opposite. Now let's go ahead and solve. So we have p equals 10 for the first equation. For the second one, again, subtract 2 from both sides. We have p equals negative 14. All right, we have a couple more examples. We have 2 times the absolute value of 2x minus 6 equals 8. Again, make sure you get the absolute value by itself, so we're going to divide both sides by 2, and that leaves me with the absolute value of 2x minus 6 equals 4. Now we write our two equations, so we have 2x minus 6 equals 4, and 2x minus 6 equals negative 4. And we're going to solve for x. So we're going to add 6 to both sides. That leaves me with 2x equals 10. Divide both sides by 2, and we get x is equal to 5. In the next one, we have 2x minus 6 equals negative 4. We're going to add 6 to both sides. That leaves us with 2x equals 2. And divide both sides by 2, which leaves us with x equals 1. So x equals 5 and x equals 1 are our answers to this problem. All right, in the next one, we have 3 times the absolute value of x minus 1 plus 5 equals 14. All right, for this problem, we're going to need to get that absolute value completely by itself. Let's start by subtracting 5 from both sides. So now I have a 3 times the absolute value of x minus 1 equals 9. And then now we still have a 3 that's out in front. So now I'm going to divide both sides by 3. That leaves me with the absolute value of x minus 1 equals 3. Okay, and then now I can write my two equations. So x minus 1 equals 3 and x minus 1 equals negative 3. We'll go ahead and solve both of these. So we're going to add 1 to both sides. That leaves me with x equals 4 for this first equation. And in the second one, again, add 1 to both sides, and that leaves me with x equals negative 2. So our answers are x equals 4 and x equals negative 2.